Hi guys, welcome back to chapter 19. For this chapter, we will be adding some weathering effects to our scene, particularly on the road, so that the reflections and the puddles and stuff are more realistic. And we will be adding that as well as volumetrics, such as fog or mists, into our scene. And lastly, we'll be adding floaters inside the air, as well as the falling rain effect. And with that being said, let us begin. Okay, now we will start with adjusting our road. As you can see here, our street is rather evenly distributed in the amount of water, and that's not usually how a road works, because for roads, usually you have some sunken parts to it due to cars going through or the soil underneath eroding. You'll have these sunken parts in the road that collects more water than the other. So it's actually not that evenly distributed, and that is what we'll be going for here with the road. So let's isolate the road, and we can go here and delete what we had before. They did a good job in making the street wet, so we do get some effects from that. But now we want to go for the realistic road. Okay, and now we'll plug this into the mapping, or the mapping into the noise texture. And with this, we can have a preview of what the noise texture is. So it's again sort of like a noise, black and white, and this will be where our sunken parts are. So as you can see, right now it's actually looking quite alright, a little bit big. So let's make the map a little, so the sunken parts are actually a little bigger, so they're not so evenly distributed, but they are more of here and there kind of state. So you have 1 second parts, 2 second parts. And now with that being said, let's plug the principle back in, and let's plug the factor into the factor here, and let's move the color down to black. So now all of a sudden you'll notice that there is appearing, some parts are appearing a little wet than the other. That's good. That's the effect that we'll be going for. Now, in order to control the amount of noise texture through contrast, we will be plugging in a map range. So with this map range, we can control the amount of, contrast within the noise. So we can choose to do how much of a puddle and dry parts we want. So with this in mind, let's go to our camera view and let's look for a good, nice puddle. And that's where the mapping comes in. So then we can start aiming for one. But it's actually kind of hard to see right now, because right now we still have all these bumpy stuff. And that's also not how puddles work, because water is flat. That's how they have reflections. But right now it's too bumpy. We can't really see anything here. So what we will do is we will use this to affect the normal map. And with this, let's plug this in here, and plus plug the result here into factor. Okay, we're getting a weird result. That is fine, because if you look at a normal map, you'll see that it's mostly this purple, blue, reddish, green color, and that's the height information that's given to a normal map. So we can mimic that by making this color into blue here. So the blue will be mimicking the normal map into telling that this part is flat. So it's giving it information, and that's how the normal map is reading our information given from our noise texture. So now we can easily choose the part. Let's actually go to this view. Okay, and let's find a good, nice puddle. We still have to do this. Okay, so let's maybe scale this a little down. And then look for that nice puddle. I think this puddle is rather nice. So let's bring it to the front. We want this to reflect our claw machine. So we'll control that. And for the front, we can just do it like that. Okay, so our machine's here, and this will give it some sort of reflection. And then we have a little bit of a puddle there. Maybe we can adjust the puddle more once we can actually see the reflection. Okay, so now back to the puddles. We're doing a lot of puddles today. You'll notice how the road is the same color, whereas where an asphalt road would actually turn dark when there's water on it. So then we'll also plug this into the factor here and plug this here. And now with the multiply, we'll make it a little darker color. And let's see the result. Okay, so we do have a little bit of a result, but it's not too obvious. Ah, right. The factor is wrong. Okay, so we plug the factor in, and now we get the result. So for the dark part, we can make it a little darker, and for the lighter part, it will be light. So now let's go back and take a look. Okay, the puddle is alright. We have this portion that's puddled, and then the other road is puddled. And we can play around with the scale. Okay, I'm gonna unhide this so we go see. Okay, this is where the position is. Let's just move this in position. Okay, so now we have the puddle, and we'll be doing this for the other parts of the for the textures as well. For example, for the gutter, because the gutter will mostly be completely wet, you won't have the puddle forming because water will be running into here. So then the size of the puddles will be much bigger. So let's go here and just copy these guys. And now let's go to the gutter. Okay. Now let's copy a mapping. Connect the vector to a vector. And then the normal map to the normal map here. Connect this here. Connect this here. And connect this here. Okay, so now we also have the gutter that's filled with water. But now for the scale, let's make the water a lot bigger. And now let's look for a position where there's a good amount of water. Like this. So then we have water in the gutter. Let's see. Yep, okay, so there is water in the gutter. But we want to have some dry parts as well, so we see the difference. And as for the gutter as well, there are higher parts of the gutter and lower parts of the gutter. So then there's also variations in water, so that's fine. And now for the sidewalk, same as before. Let's delete everything. And now copy our noise back. And the color goes here. And the normal map goes here. And the diffuse map goes here. And the vector goes here for the mapping. Okay, and now we have the sidewalk as well. And for the sidewalk, let's okay, so this is good. We have some water, but the concrete stands are doing its job. It's making the water, it's keeping the water away from the machine. That's really, really nice. And then our character is not stepping into the water, which is good because it would be really, really uncomfortable. So she's choosing a dry area to stand. That's really smart. And let's just find a place to move. Okay, I think what we had before was looking nice. Okay, so now this is our wet sort of ground, and for our curbs we can simply just use this. Let's just use this and give it a little more wetness, and that's fine. Okay, so now let's go back and turn on render and see how the effect looks. Okay, it's nice. We have our water, we have our reflections. Maybe we can make this curb slope, the roughness, a little bit more, so then it's also more reflective for being wet. And then we have here the reflections here, which is nice, on the sidewalk as well. And it's nice and wet. And the ground, we have this nice puddle here. And it's doing some sort of reflection here. Once we change the lighting, I'm pretty sure the reflection would show even more. Okay, so let's save. And that is for the ground puddles. Actually, I'm gonna do this. Right now there's too much of a gap between that and the curb, so let's move this up. Okay, and then for this, let's just adjust this up. Okay, now that with that adjusted, let's save. And now for the fog, let's go to shading, and let's take a look here. For the object, let's go to world, so that's where we set up our HDRI. Notice how there's a section for volume. Okay, so this is one way of doing just the easiest kind of volume for your world. I will show you. So let's turn on render again. So let's go to add, and then go to volume, and then you'll see a principled volume here. So let's plug that volume to volume. And now everything is black because our density is a little too high. So now let's drop it down to 0.1. And now we're starting to see a bit of our scene. And now we can drop the density down to 0.3. And we can see a little bit more. Okay, so now this is our scene with fog. So let's go ahead and take a look. Now it's really, really gloomy, and anything far is now completely black. So it's now the streetscape has become some really, really scary movie. It's like one of those horror movies where you have like cycles just jumping out of nowhere. Okay, and now let's go back to the principled volume. There's an emission strength you can use. It adds emission to the fog, so now all of a sudden our world has become daylight, and it has become what looks like Silent Hill. So the more emission you do, the more white it would appear. But let's switch to 0. But the reason why we don't really play around with principled volume is because notice how I'm changing the strength of our HDRI. Now our skylight from the HDRI is not shining through because our whole world now is covered in volume, and it's not shining through because it's the fog is just simply too thick. So then there's another way of making volume. So let's go ahead and delete this. Okay, now let's go to our camera and let's just add this one called fog. And this is what I do often, is adding the fog directly into the lights and camera because it's part of the placement of the camera. So here we have our camera, and in fog let's create a cube. And let's move the cube so it covers our camera and also the ground. So it covers the ground and the camera. And then let's go into edit, and let's take the edge selection, and let's move this all the way to where the back of our building is. So anything beyond we won't see, so let's leave that. And now let's go to our camera view. Let's go to this and turn on X-ray, and now we can see the end of our cube. Now move the edge of the cube so that it's exactly outside of your camera. And now move the top of the cube so it's exactly outside of your camera. Okay, and now let's look back, and now we have our scene that's covered in just this cone shape. And inside the cone is where we will add our volume. So this greatly reduces the thickness of the volume, allowing light to shine through. At the same time, it would also, I guess, reduce the amount of render capacity. So now let's go to Object, and let's select our fog. And now let's create a new material, and let's call this fog. And let's delete principled BSDF and type in volume so we get principled volume. And let's add this to the volume shader. Okay, so all of a sudden the sky has darkened. That's because we've added fog. And now let's turn on render. Okay, so everything is black again. Let's change this to 0.02. Okay, so now we are getting the same effect as what we did before, and at the same time this would allow our HDRI light to shine through if we choose. For example, here when I turn it to 1, this will shine through, and then 0.1 will still have some of our light. And then it is here where we can play around with the amount of fog that we have. And then depending on how strong your light is, your light will also form the necessary light shafts. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's look for, yeah, this is good. Let's make this 500. So now if the fog is thick enough, yeah, you'll see that there is a shaft of light going through your scene, and that's that fog volumetric doing its work. And we can make the color a little lighter or darker, depending on. When it's completely black, you won't see anything. So the whiter it is, the more opaque it is. So let's Control Z so it's gray again. So yeah, that is how fog works. So let's go back, change this back to 65, and then this is our scene if it's in a foggy and rainy day. Some would say that now we've been transported from somewhere, you know, in maybe US with the speed limits and everything, to or somewhere in Canada, because 40 is kilometer and not miles, to somewhere in England. Okay, and that is how fog works. But once we zoom out, we'll see that only this part has fog and that everything else is clear. So what you can do in this case is take your fog, okay, so you can take your fog and click on your camera, and you can set parent so that it's parented to your camera. Now if we go back to render, sorry for going back and forth, I know it takes a while for it to open up render every time. But suppose this is what you want to do. We can go to view and now we can turn our camera. Anywhere we look, we will have the type of volume that we want. So if you're doing an animation with like a moving scene and it has fog, then this is what you want to do. Especially if you want the HDR light to come down, so you get that fog in the distance. And we can turn this a little higher, so then only the front is visible and it's really foggy or smoggy now at this point. So yeah, this is how fog works, and I'm gonna just Control Z everything back. It's still parented, and there we go. Now it's unparented. All right. Now we can turn off the fog. We can see in the final render if we need to turn this on or not. And for the fog, there's one more thing that we can do, and it's that let's go to shading again, and let's turn on render so you can see. Since we played around with noise texture in the for the streets, now there are a way of controlling the fog, and that is by also with noise texture. Let's go here and add a noise texture, and then let's change the factor to the density, and now we can control the amount of density within our volume. So as you can see here, we are actually changing the size of the volumetric pieces, and now we can add a mapping here, and same as before, we can add a map range, and now we can play around with the amount of fog there are, much like controlling the puddles that we just did. And then we can also play around with the scale of the different individual pieces. So let's take a look in the camera view. So in case you wanted to, create a scene that has a varying amount of fog, then you can just move this so you have a moving fog. Right now the scale is a little too big, so you won't see properly. but now we have different layers of fog. So now we have fog down at the bottom, but no fog on the top. So this looks more like a mist. And for the misty effect, we can turn this on, turn the white on. So then we have more of a mist at the bottom, and then so like that. So we have mist at the bottom, and with the same technique you can parent the cube to your camera, so you'll always constantly have this kind of fog underneath the screen. And then you can also choose to move it a little so the mist is moving. Like when it moves with the wind, it might not work particularly well with our scene, but I can see that, you know, it could be something that we can play around with for our final renders. Okay, so that is with so that is for the fog. And now we can start working on the different floating atmospheric floating pieces inside an enclosed space. So when lights hit, sometimes you get little particles of dust, and that is what we'll be doing right now. Okay, so now let's go to our claw machine. First, let's go and hide the glass. Okay, and now in the claw machine, we can create a new collection, and let's call this floaters. Now go to mesh and go to cube. Okay, and now just with the face select tool, we can move the cube inside, about inside the claw machine, like that. Okay, and now with this selected, this is the cube. First, let's go to the object properties and go to viewport display and just change this to bounds, so then we don't really see it. And now next, let's go to the particle properties, and then now let's add in the particles. So now we have a bunch of these particles. And for this, let's just change the frame to 1 and 1, because then it doesn't run on a time frame for the animation. And for the lifetime, let's just give it a big number. So then this is set. Okay, and next for the velocity, let's change it to 0 because we don't want it to fall down. And let's go down to field weights. For the gravity, let's change it to 0. Okay, so now we have our bunch of these halo things. And also, let's go to sources, and from here, let's select volume. So now it's being emitted in this whole entire volume. Okay, now with that, we can hide this for now. And let's go to the floaters again. And now go to mesh, and let's add an isosphere. And for the divisions, just make it 1. So it's the most basic isosphere. So it takes up the least amount of faces. So now just you can scale this down a little, so it's on the side here. And now go back to our cube. And go to the render tab Now this is showing rendered as halo, so they call these little balls halo. First we will change this to object, and then we will take this and select the isosphere we created. So now we have these tiny little isospheres that are floating around. You can make the scale a little bigger. So it's like that. And let's go to here and go to children, just like our hair. We click children, and now it's being emitted all over the little particles we have. It's for every one, it's emitting 10, and then we can just make it to 5, and then change the roundness, or actually change the radius, like just like our hair. Now we have a lot of floating particles, and now we can just go here and just like that. And then we can change the radius smaller, so it's taking up less space. And now for the floaters, I like to give it a shading of just a normal shading. Let's just give this for now. It might have to need a little bit of an emission, but for now, let's just keep it like this. And then for the box, we will need to give this also a texture, because when you render it, it's going to show up. So for the box, let's just give it a transparent and just plug it into the surface. Okay, so now we can go here and we can hide this for now. So we just see the inside, and then we can go here and take a look. Okay, so definitely it's really big. Now we can go back here and just scale this down. So now it's like it's snowing inside, like a snow globe, and we can further change this down so it's the size of floating particles. So now you can hardly see it. Just give it a little bit of a scale. Okay, and you can further control the size here, and you can also give it a random size, so they have particles of all sorts of sizes. So then it would appear a little more natural. So especially under light, you'll be able to see the particles. Right now, since we're using just a preview, especially with the denoise on, it's going to read a lot of the particles as noise. So and then you have to wait for it to settle a little bit. So now we have little floating particles inside our box. Yeah, but from far away, I'm pretty sure it's not noticeable. So that's one way of doing the box, floating particles. Now let's, with this said, we can actually change the particles into rain. So then we can just create rain. So let's go here with what we have, the box. Let's first make a copy and call this the rain box. And let's hide these particles. So just with the rain box, let's go here and delete this for now. And let's bring it out here and just scale this all the way up. Let's scale it around here because we don't want rain to be inside the building. There's sort of like an eave going on. So let's stop right here. And for the back side, Let's stop here and just stretch this a little bit over so we end up, seeing part of it. And then, of course, here this goes to the ground, and for this we can raise it up to this height. So this is our rain box. First, we can change this to halo to see if we need to add any more. So this is looking quite okay. And now we go to mesh and go to cube, and this will be our rain. So let's take this and just scale this down a little bit. And now let's add a modifier, subdivision, and let's pull this really, really long, because actually raindrops are little droplets, but when they're filmed on decently, moderately slow shutter speed, they would appear to be lengthened. And because we're not doing an animation but a still image, then we are mimicking what the raindrop would look inside inside a slow shutter. So let's first add one here. So it's looking like a sharp needle. Whoa. Wrong selection. Okay, so let's see if the length is okay. Maybe make it a little longer. Okay, so this is about okay. Now let's shade smooth that, so it's a smooth looking rain. And then for the materials, it's the same thing as before. We'll not be using a glass BSDF, but we'll be using a transparent and a glossy. So we can control the amount of gloss and the amount of reflections and transparency on top of that. Okay, so let's make it here, and let's give it a roughness of 0.1. And then regarding this, let's just leave this for now. And then let's go back to our box. With this, let's select our rain and change this to object and select our rain. So now we have little rain droplets. Let's hide this. Let's go to our first view so we can see how big the rain is. Right now it's a little small, and we can just scale this up like what we did before. So here, let's scale this up to about 0.11, and then we do have some random size, so we want to make this smaller because the rain are falling at a mostly constant speed. So when they're captured in the shutter, they are around the same length. So we want to make this like that. So now we have a decent looking rain. We can first isolate that and just see what it looks like when it's rendered. You won't see because right now it's too dark. So now we have our rain. You can see that it's over here. And then for our rain, we can, make it more opaque or more transparent. Okay, and now let's go back here and go back to our view, and let's just make some adjustments to see how it looks in our scene. Okay, so it's not really that visible. So we can go here and make it a little bit opaque. So now we are starting to see some rain over here. As you see, it's falling. It's not too obvious because it only appears in light. So same as In real life, when we're going out, we can't really see the rain, but we see it by the amount of little ripples on the water. So then, especially if we change our light to what we have right now, it's hardly ever noticeable. Even if we change it to the most opaque, you can only see it maybe on the side where there's light hitting it, but other than that, you won't really see it. So I'm just showing you guys what rain can be added, how rain can be added, but I don't think we'll be adding this into our scene because it's already heavy enough. Yeah, now in broad daylight, you can see it better. Or if you choose to add like maybe like a headlight of some sort, then maybe when it shines on the raindrops, then you can see it better. But yeah, in broad daylight, you can still see it. And if we add the number of children, yeah, now we can see it even more. And we can change this to so it's a little more transparent, like rain. So yeah, so that's how you do rain. All right, so this is the basic weathering effects for a scene that you can add. And with that being said, this is the end of the chapter, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.